Neil Gaiman's novel, The Ocean at the End of the Lane, opens with a quote from Maurice Sendak. I remember my own childhood vividly. I knew terrible things, but I knew I mustn't let adults know I knew. It would scare them. Released in 2013, The Ocean at the End of the Lane is Gaiman's 10th novel, a short and focused dark fairy tale. The narrator, who goes unnamed through the first-person prose, begins the novel attending a funeral back in the town where he grew up. After the service, he goes for an aimless drive before he's supposed to show up at his sister's, and finds himself back on the road where he lived in his early childhood. His old house is long since gone, but the house at the end of the lane is still there, the house where Letty Hempstock lived with her mother and grandmother. He hasn't thought about Letty for years, but as he revisits, his memories return. Memories about how he met the Hempstocks, and about the thing he and Letty found together on the Hempstocks' property, a thing that followed him home. Sendak's quote is apt and sets the stage for the ocean at the end of the lane. Despite the fantasy elements staging the setting as an urban fantasy or rural fantasy, the novel has more interest and more to say about the changes that everyone goes through from childhood to adulthood than it does about the magic and monsters populating the world in the margins. It's a story about the darker corners of youth that get buried when people grow up, and coming to terms with them when they resurface. The magic and monsters are there and very front and center in the book, but the focus and themes leave that side of it feeling less like the stories about a world where magic is truly real, and more like it's a dream, something visceral and true in the moment, but only half remembered as soon as you open your eyes. Neil Gaiman is one of those writers everybody knows. Some folks might be more familiar with the movies connected to him, like Stardust, Coraline, or Princess Mononoke. Or maybe you're a fan of his comic series, The Sandman. And still others might be into his novels. Few writers are quite as expansive as he is, working across a wide variety of mediums and genres, or have impacted pop culture in quite the same way. I've enjoyed a number of his works in the past, and I'm always up for stepping into a world he's made. So how'd this one turn out? Gaiman's a writer you can count on for giving you an interesting setting to explore, and The Ocean at the End of the Lane does not disappoint. It has a rich world for how confined it is, taking place in a small English town on a rural cul-de-sac. It spends very little time anywhere aside from the main character's home or on the Hempstocks farm, but what little a reader does see has a lot of depth. The main character is an introverted, imaginative 7-year-old who takes notice of lots of little details, which all comes through in getting a sense of the story's world. A small place becomes expansive through the eyes of childhood, and that expansiveness comes through in the book in a rather engaging way. Gaiman has a knack for writing children. He captures that sense of wonder, as well as the loose logic of kids that turns shadows into nightmares but thinks the stuff that scares adults is benign, and it's difficult to read the book as an adult without tapping into a sense of nostalgia. As for the characters themselves, however, I've never been that thrilled with Gaiman's characters. I'm usually left a little cold on them. His dialogue can be expository and sparse, leaving the voices of characters ill-defined and generic. It's not particularly distracting most of the time, but his characters end up feeling more like ideas by the end of a story, rather than full characters. And that remains true in The Ocean at the End of the Lane. The most defined is the narrator, as the book spends all of its time inside his head, but despite all that time with him, he doesn't have that clear of a voice. He's left more of an archetypal everyman or every child, and given only a handful of defining traits. He's inquisitive but anxious, and spends a lot of his time reading as an escape mechanism. Like other archetypal characters, it makes him very easy to identify with as a reader, and I could see a lot of myself in the narrator, but at the same time it leaves him as a partially blank slate. The other characters don't fare much better, and with as sparse a cast as the book has, it's kind of noticeable. It's at least partially an intentional choice. A lot of the time is spent with the Hempstocks, who are by design mysterious, which makes them difficult to get to know. Letty has the most personality of them, but still remains more an elemental force than a fully realized character. The book's antagonist is similarly mysterious and elemental. The narrator's family, on the other hand, is left to broad strokes without a narrative reason as to why. This, in connection with the narrator's everyman role, turns them into sort of an every family. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it did have an effect on the story as a whole that left me wanting. A lot of what happens is a very human story that plays on parts of growing up, which are themes that are pretty easy to empathize with. All these writing choices intended to make the characters blank faces to project into aren't really needed when the situation itself is so easy to identify with. If all the characters were brimming with unique personality, I feel that connection would not have been harder to make, it would have been easier. The choice to make the characters broad strokes is closely tied to the story being written to feel like a fairy tale. As memorable as some elements of a fairy tale can be, the characters in them are blank, so it makes sense that the characters in the ocean at the end of the lane are fuzzy around the edges. However, while it might make sense, I don't feel that it was necessary to do in order to invoke that feeling of a fairy tale. The book invokes it on its own elsewhere. The dream logic of the narrator combined with the framing device of recalled childhood memories gives that same sense to the story without any extra help. Additionally, I think the choice to leave the characters lightly defined actually hurts the book in a few places. There are a handful of story beats where a real connection to the characters would pack a harder emotional punch for a reader, which are left softened and less impactful without that strong a connection. For example, part of the story concerns the relationship between the narrator and his dad, and how the situation they're in causes a strain in that relationship. That type of emotional struggle should be easy for the majority of readers to identify with, but most of the scenes in the book that touch on that plot thread end up falling a little flat, because there's not a sense of loss or turmoil inside the events themselves. There's some imparted by the loose sense of an every father and an every son's relationship struggles, but it doesn't mean very much in how it affects the narrator personally, and even less in how it affects his father. By casting a wide net, the humanity of the story is left generalized. Nothing sits with the reader for quite as long or goes quite as deep. Mechanically, Gaiman's prose is as strong as ever. He's a writer who, at his best, can paint vivid scenes and strike emotionally deep with very few words, making it easy to fall inside his books and get dragged through the lines as fast as your eyes can go. In The Ocean at the End of the Lane, he's largely successful. The pacing doesn't get bogged down in the details, so you're not ever left feeling like the book's off in the weeds, even at slow and contemplative moments. It's both easy and colorful to read, which is a winning combination. One that results in a reading experience that doesn't feel like a chore to unpack while keeping you engaged and thoughtful at the same time. For a sense of the prose, it's easy to just look at the beginning. I wore a black suit and a white shirt, a black tie and black shoes all polished and shiny. Clothes that normally would make me feel uncomfortable, as if I were in a stolen uniform or pretending to be an adult. Today, they gave me comfort of a kind. I was wearing the right clothes for a hard day. I had done my duty in the morning, spoken the words I was meant to speak, and I meant them as I spoke them. And then, when the service was done, I got in my car and drove, randomly, without a plan, with an hour or so to kill before I met more people I had not seen for years and shook more hands and drank too many cups of tea from the best china. I drove along winding Sussex country roads I only half remembered, until I found myself headed toward the town center, so I turned, randomly, down another road and took a left and a right. It was only then that I realized where I was going, where I had been going all along, and I grimaced at my own foolishness. I had been driving toward a house that had not existed for decades. I rarely find exposition this quickly engaging. The story has a laundry list to fill out in the beginning, to set the stage for the actual story, but the long, bouncy sentences full of clauses carry the reader through that list quickly and with style. It doesn't matter that nothing that happens before the narrator arrives on his old block is all that important, because we're already starting to pick up a sense of the tone and flavor, and the picture is filled in just enough to be clear and get us to where the real story begins. The rest of the book pulls you along with equal skill. At 54,000 words, it's quick and focused, the sort of book you might find yourself accidentally finishing in a single sitting. The style is simple and often utilitarian, it's only really evocative in flashes, but consistently engaging. Ultimately, it's a book that's easy to read, but kind of soft-hitting on the content. It might leave a reader feeling a little unsatisfied at the end, but not feeling like they've wasted their time. That wraps up my spoiler-free thoughts on The Ocean at the End of the Lane. Easily gets a worth reading recommendation, and you can feel proud sticking it on your main bookshelf. In 2 weeks, I'll post part 2 of this review, which will get into spoilers and discuss the themes of childhood versus adulthood in the book, as well as some of the parallels between it and a few other books by Gaiman. I hope to see you then. In the meantime, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the book. Did you love it? Hate it? Think I got it wrong? I'm all ears. And hey, if you haven't read the book yet and don't want to be spoiled, these next 2 weeks are the perfect time to catch up. That's it for this one. TTFN.